Welcome to our economics podcast, Decoding GDP. I'm Amira, and today we're diving into the gross domestic product formula and its practical applications. Joining me is my colleague Jamal. Hey Jamal, ready to crunch some numbers?
Hey Amira, absolutely. GDP is a crucial economic indicator, and understanding its formula is key for any economic student or professional. Let's break it down for our listeners.
Great, so let's start with the basics. The GDP formula is typically expressed as GDP equals C plus I plus G plus X. Jamal, can you explain what each of these components represents?
Certainly. C stands for consumer spending, I for investment, G for government spending, X for exports, and M for imports. The X minus M part represents net exports. This formula captures the total monetary value of all finished goods and services produced within a country's borders in a specific time period.
Excellent explanation. It's worth noting that this formula represents the expenditure approach to calculating GDP. There are actually three ways to measure GDP: the expenditure approach, the production approach, and the income approach. But the expenditure approach is the most commonly used.
That's right, Amira. And it's important to understand that GDP can be calculated in nominal or real terms. Nominal GDP uses current market prices, while real GDP adjusts for inflation. For most analytical purposes, real GDP is preferred, as it provides a more accurate picture of economic growth over time.
Good point, Jamal. Now, let's discuss how to use this formula in practice. Can you walk us through an example? That's a great example, Jamal. It really illustrates how straightforward the calculation can be. But of course, in reality, gathering accurate data for each component can be quite complex, especially for large economies.
Absolutely. And it's crucial to remember that while GDP is an important measure, it has its limitations. For instance, it doesn't account for the distribution of wealth, the quality of goods and services, or non-market activities like household work.
That's a critical point. GDP is a powerful tool, but it's not a complete measure of a country's well-being or standard of living. Now, let's discuss some practical applications of the GDP formula. How might economists or policymakers use this information?
Great question, Amira. Economists and policymakers use GDP data in numerous ways. For one, they can analyze the components of GDP to understand the drivers of economic growth. For example, if investment, I, is declining, it might signal a need for policies to stimulate business spending.
And what about international comparisons, Jamal? How does the GDP formula come into play there?
When it comes to international comparisons, economists often use GDP per capita, which is calculated by dividing a country's GDP by its population. This gives a rough estimate of the average standard of living. However, to make these comparisons more accurate, they typically use purchasing power parity, PPP, adjustments to account for differences in the cost of living between countries.
Excellent point. It's also worth mentioning that economists often look at GDP growth rates rather than absolute GDP values to assess economic performance. This involves calculating the percentage change in GDP from one period to another.
Absolutely. And for a more nuanced analysis, economists might dive deeper into the subcomponents of each main category in the GDP formula. For instance, breaking down consumer spending into durable goods, non-durable goods, and services can provide valuable insights into consumer behavior and economic trends.
That's a great point, Jamal. As we wrap up, what would you say is the key takeaway for our listeners about the GDP formula and its use?
I'd say the most important thing to remember is that while the GDP formula itself is relatively simple, its application and interpretation require careful consideration. It's a powerful tool for understanding the size and growth of an economy, but it should always be used in conjunction with other economic indicators for a comprehensive analysis.
Couldn't agree more, Jamal. Thank you for sharing your insights today. And to our listeners, we hope this discussion has helped demystify the GDP formula and its applications. Until next time, keep crunching those numbers.
Thanks, Amira. And remember, listeners, economics is all around us. Happy analyzing.